Good evening. I'm Michael Walker. Thank you for coming. This is the Data Science Group at the University of Colorado, Denver. We have a great show for you tonight. We have Tommy Balchetis from the Denver Nuggets. He's Director of Sports Analytics. And I don't know how many of you are basketball fans. I'm a big basketball fan and have really been getting into the analytics. And really want to thank Tommy for coming here. We're really lucky to have him. And then we have Dr. Inigo San Milan, who is going to be talking about human performance. There's been a huge jump in the last 10 years, huge advances in exercise physiology, in sports science, in nutrition, and it's something as a sports enthusiast I'm really interested in. I think data science is going to play a huge role in the next 10 or 15 years in sports. I think we're right at the very beginning. It's going to evolve into something very special. And I think even if you're not into professional or college sports, if you're just an amateur athlete like myself, understanding your human body and how to treat your body better through nutrition, through exercise, through sleep, it really is a science. Wanted to get a couple of house cleaning things out of the way. We have the Data Science Association first ski professional retreat and forum, and that's on April 11th. I'd like to recommend, if any of you are interested in going up to Vail for a ski weekend, it's going to be really fantastic. We can give presentations during the morning and the evenings and ski during the day, or if you don't like to ski, there's a million things going on. It's the last weekend up in Vail, and it's a huge party. They have free concerts and all sorts of other activities, and it's just a beautiful place. I'd also like to inform you that the Data Science Association is officially part of the International Journal for Data Science, which is an international journal, and we are going to provide the practitioner end. There's another academic end that my colleague John Wayne is heading up, and so we're joining forces. And right now I'm negotiating what the standards will be for practitioners submitting papers, because it's got to be different than what the academics are submitting. So I really want to encourage you to think about submitting a paper. It doesn't have to be academic requirement style. We'll probably negotiate that in the next few weeks, and it can really help your professional careers to publish a paper in this International Journal for Data Science. Also, at the end of today, we're going to be going down to Old Chicago on Market Street, and I'd like to encourage you to come, meet new people, make new friends. Okay, Tommy, thank you very much.
Let's start with the blue screen. Michael, can you use that?
Hit the shift key, hopefully it'll come back on.
Okay. All right, thank you. Thank you, Michael, for having me here. Thanks, guys, for coming out. Really appreciate you, spending your time tonight as opposed to doing something else. Coming here listening to me talking about basketball analytics. Any Nuggets fans in here? Hopefully, maybe. What's that? Last year? Things will get better. So, my name is Tommy Balchetis. I am the manager of basketball analytics with the Nuggets. Quick bio. I was born and raised in Lithuania. I came over in 2004. Went to high school and college, and then stayed in Boston, and consulting for 2 years for Fidelity, was internal consultant for Fidelity Investments. And then I joined the NBA in London for a year, worked on the international expansion, but primarily through media. And I met Tim Connolly, who was a current GM in Moscow, actually doing one of my business trips, and ended up here. So, it's a new front office. We're all pretty much new in our roles, so we're kind of learning as we go. It's been a lot of fun, and I'm excited to share some things with you guys today. Hopefully, you guys will get a better idea sort of what I do, what we do in general for as part of our front office in terms of analytics. So, without further ado, we'll go ahead and talk about what we're going to talk about today. So, we'll go through. So, first of all, before we even go into it, so all the views are my own. I can't speak for Tim, the GM, can't speak for anybody else in the front office. It's going to be my opinion and all of this kind of stuff. I won't be able to go into too much detail in terms of various projects. I'm sure you guys understand there are all these confidentiality things just because the field is so young. Everybody's trying to gain an edge, so we can't really overshare. But I'll do my best to share as much as I can today. And hopefully, if you guys want to learn a little more, you can talk to me after the presentation. So we'll talk about some of the resources that we're using for our projects, our analytical projects, and I'll go through a few examples of projects that I do for coaches, players, and the front office. And we'll talk about some of the major trends in analytics as well as some of the pitfalls, and we'll leave some time for questions at the end. So let's talk about some of the resources that we use today. I can stand here so you guys can see everything. Is that working? So let's start with Synergy over there. So how many of you guys have heard of Synergy? Yes, maybe a little bit. Okay. So Synergy it's a quick summary. It's a video tracking system. It's like an online system that you subscribe to. And I don't know an NBA team that does not subscribe to Synergy. It's pretty much the standard right now. What you can do with it is essentially just watch players in action. Any player, domestically and internationally. Maybe not every player, but the majority is definitely there. And it covers domestic leagues, international leagues, and the way it works. Now, I don't work for Synergy, so I can't give you all the intense detail about it, but the way it works is essentially a lot of guys just watching a lot of games and cutting the clips into various categories, and then they're all uploaded, and we can actually watch them. So the good thing about Synergy, you can actually watch clips of your games as soon as the game is done, which is always mind-boggling to me, because you just watch the game, and then an hour later you can actually watch every single clip of every pick and roll that happened or something like that. So we definitely use that a lot for if we want to trade for a player, we're looking for somebody internationally. We use Synergy a lot to get a feel for the players. Some of the key advantages, obviously, you can watch those guys play. It gives you rankings of certain points per possession. So the way they do it, they actually they look at various play types and how many points you score off of those play types, and then find points per possession, and then you can rank how well you do. So Darrell Arthur can be a really good pick and pop guy. He may be in the 80th percentile or something. I haven't checked the numbers, don't quote me on that, but he's pretty good at that. The second one is going to be Real GM. Real GM, again, becoming an industry standard. We're using it a lot as well, primarily for scouting capabilities. They have a really nice interface for scouting. And that's where we sort of go watch games, input everything into Real GM. So it's not the same Real GM that you guys can just go on realgm.com. Every team has a sort of like a custom Real GM interface. So the Nuggets have one, and we've been using that for scouting. But they also have a lot of cool things like trade validation. Some of you guys, I'm sure, have used the ESPN one. Similar, but they actually give you a lot of really interesting additional things like they use various trade exceptions and things like that. So it just makes your life easier. They also have a really good stats database. It's really robust. It has advanced stats, it has all the basic stats, everything you need. And the cool thing is that you can actually compare players head to head, or the way you want to do it, 3 or 4 players at the same time. And you can take players from different eras and compare them to last year's stats or 2 years ago, things like that. Whatever you want to do, we can compare. You can say MJ at his 5th season was, I don't know, better than LeBron in his 2nd season. I don't know, something like that. So we can do that with Real GM. It's pretty robust. ICE. You guys heard of SportView? It's kind of like the big name recently in the recent years. SportView is 6 cameras mounted on the ceilings, tracking every player movement and the ball movement. 1/13 of a second. They're kind of taking lots of little pictures, and they scan the court, and there's a lot of information that you glean from that. So ICE is that's the interface to give you that information from SportView cameras. And I'll actually go into all of these kind of little screenshots so you guys will see what I'm talking about. StatsView, that's actually my favorite one. It's essentially an Excel add-in. So it works like a pivot table. There's 23 years of data, which is amazing. And you can just do analysis right there on Excel. And that's the thing that I'm actually most comfortable with. So there's no need to export anything, it's just right there. Obviously, with web resources, statslineNBA.com has gotten really good recently. Hollinger, Ken Pomeroy, 82 Games, all those public websites that are available to all of you guys. So let's talk about the first one, synergy. So I mentioned that it's primarily used for video. So this is kind of what it looks like. You know, in your offensive and defensive, you can look at different things, offensively and defensively. This is, I believe this is us. Yes, this is the Nuggets. So it gives you a breakdown of transition versus half-court offense and how good we are. See, we're excellent at running. We knew that, right? We all knew that. Various play types and how well we're executing them. One of my favorite things actually right here is the percent of scoring, so at least 1 point. So it's not just field goal percentage, it's actually, you know, if you get fouled, and if you make at least one, you know, if you make at least one free throw, it's going to count as percent score, which is a good stat to have. As well as number 6 there, it's called analytics, which essentially gives you the standings of every team for all of these play types. So you can say, you know, the best pick and roll team in the league is, you know, X. I'm going to incriminate myself, I'm not going to say who it is. All right, so real GM, this is what it looks like. You know, comparing Gallo to Dirk, for example. You know, it gives you really nice graphical representations of how these two guys compare to each other. That's probably the thing that I've liked the most, is that it's so easy to just shoot it over to your GM and say, hey, listen, you know, Gallo is, you know, X percent from the field, and Dirk is, you know, Y percent, and, you know, you can actually do a lot of cool different things with, you know, all these per-minute stats, advanced stats. Some of this stuff is fairly basic, I understand that, but I mean, it's just really nice when you can actually have all the presentation capabilities in one place. And that's half the battle, actually. Some of the benefits, obviously, great representation of data, and it's customizable, which is really nice. Customer service is excellent with Real GM. If you want something done, if you want something taken away, they'll do it just, you know, after a phone call. So we've been using that a lot. ICE, so I talked about Sport View a little bit. So this is their interface. I personally think it's a little clunky. I'm sure it's a work in progress for them. But it gives you various things that other websites or other resources won't give you. So, you know, distance run, right? So how many miles did Ty Lawson run during the game? Some of you are thinking, why do we need to know that? I agree with you. I'm not sure if I need to know that. But, you know, at some point you may think about injury prevention, you know, resting your guys, things like that. So it can be definitely used. You know, other things like, I love catch and shoot percentage. So other resources won't give you that, but, you know, how well do you shoot from catch and shoot situations? So they actually calculate, you know, if you're receiving the ball and within 2 seconds you release it without a dribble, they give you a percentage of how well you shoot. So several of our guys are way better at catch and shoot as opposed to putting the ball on the floor. So as a coach, you show that to a coach, and the coach will be like, well, all right, you know, that's something that they need to do. If a young player, you know, gets that information, they're usually, well, you know, I'm trying to expand my game, so I'm not going to become a specialist right now. That's half the battle, but that's for the coaching staff to take care of. But older guys, veteran guys tend to sort of understand that if your catch and shoot percentage is higher, that's kind of what you need to do. That's your go-to. So that's a, you know, quick live interpretation of some of this data. StatsCube, as I mentioned, my favorite. Just right there on Excel, it just, you know, gives you all of that database, and you can create all these, you know, tables. This is what I did here is I looked at some of our guys and how well they performed when they started on, you know, the bench, or they started, in the case of Wilson Chamber here, started as a small forward, or when he started as a power. So, you know, some of this information, well, Wilson kind of started, you know, as a power forward only 2 games, so that's not necessarily a big sample size, obviously, but you can tell that, you know, he's shooting a little higher when he's a power forward. What that means is for the coaching staff to decide, but it raises interesting questions. Finally, web resources. I'm sure you guys have gone on some of these. This is stats and data. Again, it's become way better over the recent years, and I've been using it a lot. Hollinger as well. The thing, you know, the positive about it is everybody can access it. You can just shoot over a link and that's it. So it's, you know, it's the ease of transacting, which I like about web resources, obviously. But there's no one-stop shop for all of them, so that's the drawback. All right, so let's talk about some of the examples of projects that we've done. Now, again, this is just a quick tip of the iceberg. I can't really, you know, share all the big ones, all the pre-game, post-game stuff that we do. But I'll show you a few things I shared with the coaches. I'm going to go over here. So this is something small, something very basic. You look at the last 10 games of our guys, and then you kind of look at how they've been performing the entire season, and just run a very simple kind of Excel macro to to color all these numbers. Who's been performing really well over the last 10 games, and who's been kind of struggling. It sounds simple, but it really gives the coaches something to look at and something to consider. If you look at Randy Toy over here, not shooting the three as well as he used to. Right here, he used to shoot a lot, and he used to make a lot more of them. And for the last 10 games, he has not. This is from January, by the way. This is not the last actual 10 games. But this is something that the coaches can look at. If you see somebody who's kind of red across the board, all of a sudden, where's the issue? Maybe the player is tired. Maybe the player feels like he's not playing to his potential. Maybe he's off position. Whatever it is, it's for the coaching staff to decide. I'm more a proponent of the fact that analytics will raise questions as opposed to give answers, right? That's what I believe in, and I feel like you can suggest certain answers to the coaching staff, but they're smart enough to understand what's going on, and they don't necessarily have to take my suggestions, but it definitely does raise questions, and that's the way we've sort of been working with the coaching staff. This is something I did for Ty, so this would be for a player. So Ty, beginning of the season, he would explode in the third quarter and not play as well in the first, second, and fourth. And we kind of tried to understand why that is. Now that's something that we saw. I just wanted to make sure that it was actually true. So look at his numbers. This is per 36. So what it means is if he played 36 minutes, the entire 36 minutes as he played in the first quarter, he would have this stat line. If he played the entire 36 minutes as he played in the second quarter, he would have that stat line. So if you look at it, third quarter, that's a sweet spot. He's shooting the best. He's scoring second highest. Lowest turnovers. So what's happening, right? You show that to Ty, and Ty's like, wow. I kind of maybe first couple of quarters I kind of distribute the ball a lot more, and actually I think that's actually true. He's passing the ball a lot more in the first quarter as opposed to third quarter where he actually just takes all the scoring load. So that's what I've found in my fairly I've been with the Nuggets for 7 months, so not a long time. But what I've found is that players are going to be very receptive to this kind of stuff if you show them the numbers. Because the coaches can tell them certain things, and they will definitely listen. But if you show them the numbers, it's kind of it's almost like a fact, and they get it. So they've been very receptive. I've definitely enjoyed working with certain players. So Ty is one of them. Ty is great. He kind of takes this information, elevates his game. Now this is an example that I did. This is an example of a project I did for the front office. The draft is coming up. We wanted to see how likely you are to draft certain players in certain draft slots. So, the probabilities of drafting all-stars. So the question was, if you're 1 through 5, what's the probability that you're going to end up in an all-star? And I kind of looked at the last 20 years, and I looked at all those draft slots and looked at who were picked in those draft slots. So it's interesting because there's a big drop-off from 1 through 5 to 6 through 15. You can always end up with guys like that. Or even if you go lower, you're going to end up with some really good players. Tony Parker and David Lee, and David Lee was number 30. So you can always end up with guys like that. But there's a much higher probability you'll end up with somebody really good if you draft 1 through 5. And then other than some busts, but the probabilities don't lie. Same here. Not necessarily all stars, but solid players, solid guys. Again, kind of similar idea. Nothing spectacularly complex, but I think it's telling. That you have Gallo kind of from 6 to 15, and this year they're saying 6 to 15. You have first 5 guys who are going to be really good. It's a deep draft, but when you look at it, how likely is it that somebody from that particular draft slot is going to end up being a good player? Well, history says it's going to be like 30% chance. So that's something we did for the draft. Now. Let's talk about some of the trends, just overall trends. Let's walk away from the Nuggets a little bit, talk about kind of what's going on in the industry. So I know some of you guys said you heard of SportView. So SportView it's really neat actually. It's based, the whole premise is kind of based off of like an Israeli army I read it somewhere. I thought it was really cool. But that's the way they used to track, I guess, enemy movement maybe. I don't know. But now they're tracking players. So that's a cool way to use it. So they're tracking all the players on the court, 6 cameras constantly monitoring what's going on, 1/13th of a second, they're taking pictures. And again, they give you really cool data that is used through that ICE interface that I showed you. What they also do actually, they send you a large XML file, which is coordinates. It's a huge file. And if you're not a programming guy, I don't have a programming background, but some of my friends do, and there's a lot you can do with that data. Honestly, I'm sure you guys have heard, there's so much you can do, there's so much data now. I agree with it. You have to have a certain skill right now to actually go through those mounds and mounds of data, and that's something that is definitely going to be a focus for me and for my department kind of going forward. At the same time, RefCam, you guys heard of that? There was I think it was a Google Glass, but during a WNBA game, a ref was wearing glasses. Essentially, they were tracking everything that was happening on the court, and you could watch the game through the vantage point of the ref. I don't know, I kind of watched it. It's weird. I mean, it's okay, but you don't really necessarily get the feel of the game. But maybe at some point there were mixed reactions. Some people said it was really cool. Some people said, it was extremely confusing. But going forward, there's a stipulation that maybe at some point the players can wear a camera on their jersey or something like that, so you can actually see what LeBron is seeing when he's playing. I think that would be kind of interesting, as opposed to a ref. So that's going somewhere, and obviously it's still in its early stages. Investment analytics, also a big trend, kind of more of a general trend. There is different levels of investment in it. Teams are being extremely secretive about it, which is good. But there are certain teams that are kind of front runners in that regard. Certain teams invest a lot of money. I guess it's public information at this point. Toronto Raptors actually invested over $2 million into their Ghost technology. Have you guys heard of that by any chance? No. So Ghost, essentially, what they do is so that they get that information from SportView, and there's a lot of sort of data mining. What they end up with is where the players were and where they were supposed to be. So there are ghost players for each player. And if a shot was made, the ghost player should have been here. So there's a very complex algorithm of where the player was supposed to be to prevent the shot or make sure that the shot was as low percentage as possible. So I can't even imagine the manpower and the investment that required. But I think it's pretty cool. But not that many teams can do that. It's just certain teams that have the resources. So the Raptors are one. The Rockets have been leading the pack for a little while now. But other teams are catching up, and at some point, hopefully, there's going to be a parity between teams, among teams. But we'll see what's going to happen. But during the MIT Sloan conference, which I was able to attend, Brian Colangelo, former Raptors GM, he was talking about the kind of like the minimum investment would be $250,000 to $500,000. 2 to 3 people. This guy works with me. He's late. I thought it was a manager that came down. So 2 to 3 people kind of full-time dedicated for analytics. So that's becoming the standard. And again, the return on investment is becoming somewhat clear. It's still kind of early to really say that it's going well or it's not going well. I mean, the Raptors and the Rockets are doing really well, so you can say like maybe it's working. But who knows? I mean, they've been working on it for a little while, and only this season did we do both of the teams doing well. So you don't really know, but hopefully it's becoming more clear in the future. Some of the pitfalls, those are the most interesting to me. I mean, I kind of went into that whole industry when I got the job, kind of all bright-eyed that analytics is going to change everything. But you know what? I mean, it's not. The more I'm actually with the Nuggets, the more people I meet. It's it is a tool, but it's never going to be the #1 thing. Or I don't know, not in the near future because of certain reasons. Not necessarily these 4 reasons, but you can't really over-rely on data. So Paul George is there's like a pick and roll situation between Paul George and Roy Hibbert, right? And Roy screens him, and Paul kind of goes to the right corner, dribbles the ball a little bit, takes a shot. Now, was that a pick and roll or was that an ISO, right? I mean, you don't really necessarily know. I mean, it kind of depends on who's watching the game and who's gonna. So that's kind of a drawback of synergy. The synergy can choose one of those two. They can't do both. So that's something that, if you over rely on the data. I mean, Paul George is a great defender, for example. He's a great defender. So that's my actual example. So Paul George is a great defender, but is it because Roy Hibbert is down low, kind of, blocking every shot that comes his way? Therefore, Paul George can actually overplay his man a little bit. So things like that. I mean, you don't really know in isolation whether Paul George is a really good defender. I'm not saying he's not. I mean, I'm pretty sure he is. But that's something that you have to question when you have a shot blocker like Roy Hibbert. Need for context is another one. There was an example that Steve Kerr actually raised during MIT. Is that Amari and J.J. Hickson had somewhat similar field goal percentages within the baskets, the 0 to 5 feet within the basket. And Amari at that point was kind of at his peak, playing for Phoenix, playing really well, and he was known as a really good finisher in the league. But he was second to J.J. Hickson, and they were like, well, why is that? I mean, is J.J. really that much better of a finisher? And what they found was that J.J. is excellent when it comes to 0 to 1 because he dunks everything, and Amari is actually slightly better, actually 0 to 5. He's actually better a little further from the rim. So that's something that, if you just look at the data, you're like, okay, well, J.J. is a better finisher, but we need the context to really evaluate those two players. Abundance of data, another thing I kind of raised a little earlier. Miles traveled, I mean, why, right? I mean, why do we need it? Maybe injury prevention, maybe things like that, but there's so much that sometimes I've learned to not to actually bring certain things to the coaches or to the front office because it's just going to be a lot of noise, right? I mean, certain teams never had analytics. It's actually interesting, Phil Jackson was one of the speakers at MIT, and they were trying to ask analytically based questions, and I honestly don't think he actually answered any of them. He just kind of like, yeah, that's good. So Dennis Robinson, so it was interesting. And so you don't necessarily always need to, take all the data and really make something out of it. I mean, sometimes it can just be noise, right? So you need to whittle it down to what's actually going to be worth for the coaches to see and make sure that, you don't overwhelm them with all that information. Finally, measurables, certain things you just can't track, right? Team chemistry, how valuable it is. Bruce Bowen, right? Or, Dirk, and we all know that Dirk is a great player, but how valuable is Vince playing with Dirk? They're both veterans. They love playing with each other. They love the fact that they both can kind of play off of each other, and you can't really measure that, right? All this, I don't know. You can track smiles, hugs, whatever you want to do. It's actually literally somebody proposed that, which I thought, yeah, that's interesting. I mean, there's a way to track. The most high fives is Miami Heat. Therefore, their chemistry is best. But who knows? Maybe that's where we're going. But that's not something you can really track and believe. So I guess with that, I've been talking a lot. You guys, go ahead. The floor is open. Any questions you have? Go ahead. Sorry.
How do you make sure the data quality is reasonable, especially when you propose those results to players? They will question. And yes, how many points they make is easy to count, but like their hugs, their smiles, how could we count?
Oh yeah. I got it. Is that
the question, please?
Oh sure. Well, how do you sort of measure certain things? How do you trust the data? Right. I guess that would be the question. No, good question. That's why when you have certain data, whether it's online or through one of those systems, you do have to question them. In certain things, I guess you kind of trust a little more, just because field goal percentage. I mean, whether the guy made the shot or not, it's kind of clear. But with synergy, for example, I'm not saying that I'm sure they have people who understand basketball, but at the same time, it was actually an incident. I actually showed Ty that certain play type he was not great at, and I honestly didn't really believe that he was not great at that play type. I thought he was actually pretty good at it, but the data said differently, which is something that you run into every once in a while. So you can't really. You have to be a good judge of what you're going to show to the coaches or the players. And I guess the short answer is you can't always trust it, but certain things you can, right? So I would have to look at certain synergy stats with an eye of kind of disbelief or skepticism. But I guess other box score stats are, I feel like they're fairly accurate because they're not necessarily there's not a human element in kind of adding them. Does that kind of answer your question a little bit? Okay. Yes.
Are you streaming any data real time to make adjustments throughout the game?
No. Not as of now. I think it's a great idea. There was a paper at MIT that kind of did expected, I don't remember exactly what it's called, but it's EPV, expected value of possession per yard. EVP, yes, EVP. What they did was essentially they looked at certain play, with Tony Parker bringing the ball up. What's the percentage he's going to pass? What's the percentage he's going to go right, left? It was essentially a whole spectrum of things that he could do. They would kind of just narrow it down to the most likely ones. And at every second, there's a percentage of what's going to happen. So I thought that was really cool. That's not necessarily exactly what you're talking about, because I think what you're talking about is kind of, after the first quarter, what can we do differently, right? So as of now, we don't have that capability, but we look at box scores and we're getting the limited information from box scores and making adjustments that way, and kind of from what we're seeing. When I say we, it's the coaching staff, not me. I'm not part of the coaching staff. But I think that's the future, kind of doing the live tracking and almost like interfacing with the coach through that'd be great.
Yeah, it just goes to your point about over-reliance. I was thinking more in terms of, as the game is being played, you can see how your opponents are seeing your players.
Right.
In the same way they are, because they're going to pick up their behaviors, their agility, their movements, and plays are going to change. You're going to see guys, how they respond a little bit differently. When say, hey, you know what? This guy, I'm going to go ahead and make a quick player change because he responds better. He's getting outplayed in that spot.
No, I think it's a great call. That's something that at this point the coach sees, right? And the coach with experience can make those adjustments. But if we can add any kind of data element to it, I'm all for it, and I think it's a great idea. Okay.
Kind of a two-part question. A lot of the stats you show are on an individual basis. How are you starting to correlate those into game statistics? So you're trying to figure out what are the stats that will most be likely predictors of the game result?
Right.
And the second half, would be are there statistics that you're trying to find kind of like Moneyball style where we're measuring the wrong things? So instead of measuring my batting average, it really should be my on-base percentage or whatever that be.
No, both good questions. So answer the second one first. Actually, no, first one first. There's certain stats right now that kind of give you. Have you heard of the WARP? Wins over like an average replacement player. There's one. Another one is win shares and things like that. The mixed reactions with our front office, at least, kind of whether we can actually trust them or not. But we definitely look at them, all those things. But I guess what you're asking is also just beyond individual stats and how those correlate to the wins. I guess it's just a matter of interpretation. I mean, when Dye scores a certain number of points, or when we do certain things, we do that in our post-game reports. So we have certain goals that we set, and we try to hit those goals. And more likely than not, when those goals are set, we win. Right? More often than not, I should say. So we do it that way. Now, in terms of individual stats, not as much. But I think that would be an interesting thing to see. Whether when Dye does this and Wilson does that, and when JaVale's healthy, when he's doing that, all of a sudden, it's a higher likelihood to win. Sure, I think that's an interesting one. Repeat your second question. Sorry.
It was, are you measuring the right things? So, for example, you might be measuring, free throw percentage as a higher, statistic. That's easy, but maybe it's, shot percentage, but you don't know if the person's there, with someone that pays or not.
Sure. Good question. So, and we don't necessarily rely on the box score as much anymore, because box scores, they don't tell the whole story, right? Right now, when we look at certain things, we are, seeing the percentage of available rebounds, just rebounds, right? We have moved on from, we still use it kind of, but we have mostly moved on from just average box score statistics. At this point, we're looking at what SportView gives us in terms of catch and shoot percentage. Available rebounds, I think, is a really interesting one because if you're always in a position to get a rebound but you don't get that many, you're not a great rebounder. Right? Ty is up there on the three-point line. He's not going to get as many rebounds, therefore we can't really judge him on the fact that he gets 3.6 rebounds a game. But his available rebound percentage is really good because when he's in the vicinity of a rebound, he gets a lot of it. So we definitely do those things, and we definitely try to you look at what gives us the best picture. And honestly, I can't remember the last time we looked at just a basic stat and said, oh, this is great. It's always it's been mostly the sport view data and some of the advanced stats. So we're definitely doing that, as well as certain things that we track ourselves when we watch games. So it's not always, we don't necessarily always rely on what's given to us after a game. We watch games and we track certain things, and but it's also kind of like a resource issue. We also always have to have guys during the game, game time guys to do that. So we're definitely trying to do that as well. So, yes.
So teams with bigger budgets, would it be a safe assertion that they're probably, in addition to tracking their own players, tracking their competitors as well?
Yes. No, same assumption, and it's easier in terms of human resources that they can hire a bunch of college grads who will do it for free to do that. So there's certain limitations, I guess legal limitations to do that. But yes, the teams with bigger budgets can allow themselves a little bit more flexibility in that regard, and I agree. Teams are trying to get to that level where they can do that. But we do our own scouting as well, so we have coaches who do that. But I would love to do a little more sort of like an analytical take on certain teams that we play. But we do have pre-game reports that we look at we look at certain stats, we watch certain tape on certain players. We kind of give, actually Dan is one of the guys who works for me, so he works on the pre-game reports as well. So we take 3 best players from a team, purely time constraint because he's just one of him, and he kind of looks at certain players and what their tendencies are, and that we do that through synergy, for example, or just watching games. So that's a good question. Certain teams, I feel like certain teams definitely have a better grasp on it because they have more people and more money to do it. But I think we're actually doing a pretty decent job at that. Sorry.
Regarding salaries, we're talking about drafting and all that, quite right at, and then just go. How do you use this to predict the minimum salary that is needed to first off attract a player and to keep a player?
In terms of salaries?
Yeah.
So with salaries, it really depends on your current situation. So, if you're over the cap, you're only limited to certain exceptions, right? So, I would probably leave this question to one of our, well, he's our director of team operations, so we have a cap guy to deal with that. But I guess I can speak to it a little bit. There are certain exceptions to sort of, when you have to get guys. So you have the minimum player exception, so you can get as many minimum guys as your roster allows up until 15. You have mid-level exceptions, things like that. So we're kind of right now in our situation fairly limited in terms of who we can bring in. We can't bring somebody in for like $3 million. Because it doesn't work with the cap. But we can bring in certain players with minimum exceptions, and we used up our mid-level this year. So there are certain rules that I can't necessarily be completely comfortable, discussing because I'm not a pro in that. Yes, Mike.
I'm going to change my question to be a follow-up to hers. Do you have any metrics like points per dollar spent on salary?
Yeah, we did that at the beginning of the year. It's kind of like bang for your buck almost. We did that. The data is somewhat clouded by the fact that there's a rookie scale. So we have certain guys who are making not as much money, but they're playing really well, right? So Chandler Parsons comes to mind from the Rockets. The guy's making $900K, and he's probably third best player on that team. And the data kind of is almost skewed in that regard. So we look at every single player in the league and kind of what they're making in terms of how they're performing. And there's definitely some standouts, and you would think that, oh, this guy should definitely be making more, or this guy's completely overpaid. There are guys like that. But yes, we do track that.
Do you do any strategic analysis? For example, analyzing what teams have done well, the Miami Heat, the Los Angeles Lakers, and the Boston Celtics,
Yes.
and find out are there common attributes to
Yep.
how they set up their business model,
Mm-hmm.
and try to learn from that and incorporate the way the Denver Nuggets is going to be rebuilt?
Sure. Well, this question almost seems planted because it's pretty funny because there was a project that I did early on when I first got here. We looked at the last 20 winners, just champs, and what in terms of certain statistical categories that we were good at and what they were not good at, and there were certain things that actually were really telling. they were not necessarily the fastest teams. You know, they were always top 5 in defensive rebounding, for example. So that probably, you know, it means that they had, you know, that's the value that they placed on certain things. They were pretty slow in pace over the last, I guess, maybe, not in the last couple of years, because Miami's pretty fast, but before that, you know, with the Lakers, with the Spurs, even with Dallas, when they won in, when was it? Just recently, 2010, yeah, 2010, 2011. They were pretty slow. So, you know, pace doesn't necessarily translate into rings. It kind of works in the regular season, but not always in the postseason. People are probably thinking about the Nuggets right now, which is fine. But you know, we love to run fast, and there's no sort of denying that fast pace doesn't necessarily translate into rings, but history doesn't really support that. Now, you know, with Miami winning the last couple of championship rings, they've been playing really fast. So I guess the theory is somewhat disputed. But over the last 20 years, a lot more teams won when they were playing slow. So, but that's only one example of kind of a stats category. But we did track kind of what they were good at, and it's mostly teams that make a lot of threes. They're really, you know, they're not that fast. Defensive rebounding is always up. There were a few other things.
I think also if you look at the Los Angeles Lakers of the 1980s with Magic Johnson, they played fast.
Yes.
So there's additional evidence that you can win titles playing
Right.
fast.
But you know, I guess it's not the rule. I guess it would probably be more of an exception, but you know, I guess it depends on what you think an exception is. But yeah, mostly slow. Seems like, especially in the playoffs, it's kind of like grind it out. That's when teams win. Yes.
I'll assume that delivering and presenting this material to players and coaches can sometimes be difficult. In your 7 months, how's your approach changed kind of better to that?
Good question. You know what? I was actually pleasantly surprised. I've heard some stories that usually, whether it's coaches or players, they don't necessarily try to track that stuff or they don't necessarily believe it. Well, the way you have to do it, I mean, you can't all of a sudden come to somebody and say, listen, you're really bad at that, you need to change that, right? You need to kind of ease your way into getting the confidence from the players, right? So you tell them what they're good at and then what they should keep doing. But you know, every once in a while, definitely you frame it as an area of improvement as opposed to something that they're bad at. I guess that's a consultant in me talking, but that's kind of how I've approached it. And I've been lucky with the front office and the coaching staff have been extremely receptive. I mean, even if the coaching staff, they don't necessarily have much experience with it, you try not to overwhelm them with stuff that doesn't matter, or stuff that is extremely complex. Not saying they're really smart guys, they would absolutely get it, but you kind of start slow with certain very low-hanging fruit, right? Like the last 10 versus how they've been doing. It's a pretty simple graph. You can glean a lot of information from it. But the approach, I mean, I definitely have to sort of alter it a little bit. I started off, you know, kind of approaching certain players with certain small things, then they can kind of gain more confidence in me so I can actually, you know, do more analysis for them. So now I actually get players asking me for a variety of different things, and I mean, that's definitely a place where I want to be. Yes?
Sounds like a lot of your work relates to like the strategy of the game, winning games. Really, does anything that you do relate to like the business operations of the franchise, kind of informing marketing strategy and running it?
Good question. Not as much as now. Not as much. I would like to actually do a little more on that, you know, on that side as well. Right now, it's mostly been about winning games. But you know, I guess some of my consulting experience, kind of I've done some. I helped a little bit with the kind of like with the website and what we can do a little better to attract more people. But in terms of like analytics and things like that, not as much just yet. But I'm definitely thinking of, you know, maybe including some of the things that I've shown, maybe some projects, you know, actually featuring that on the website. That would be kind of cool. So yeah, I think it'd be a good expansion of what my department can do. Yes.
In the NBA, there's been a lot of controversy about teams tanking. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, it's a pretty contentious issue. I feel like I wouldn't necessarily. This is completely my opinion, right? Not of the Denver Nuggets and not Tim Connolly, nobody. But when I was at MIT, they were definitely talking about kind of how we can remedy that. So I can probably speak to that a little bit. I mean, there are various ways, I guess, to try to prevent teams from tanking. There was a suggestion to do like a, every team gets a first round pick, or at least top 5 every 30 years, right? So it doesn't matter what your record is, when you're getting that top 5 pick, which could probably work in theory because you don't have any incentive to lose games anymore because you're not getting a top 5 pick next year, so it doesn't matter. Some of the issues there are, if you're a player in college and you know that somebody, that you're probably going to be a top 5 pick or maybe even a number 1 pick, and you don't want to go to a certain city, for example, you may decide to stay in school, so there may be certain things from that end, as well as, there are picks that have been untraded up until 2017 now, so you have to wait until that time anyway to sort of start everything fresh, unless they can figure it out. But obviously it's I understand that Adam Silver sees that as an issue.
Well, let's just take the Denver Nuggets, for example. The rational incentive would be to lose games to get a higher pick, right?
Right.
How do you change that incentive?
Well, we're not in the business of losing games, right? I understand it's a rational thing, and the whole rational argument would be to lose many games, but nobody wants to be a part of that culture, right? Maybe some teams do. I don't know. Again, speaking from my own perspective here, but we were also in a slightly unique situation this year because we could have won as many games as we wanted to. We could have been in the playoffs. It doesn't matter, but we had that situation where we could pick between our pick or the New York Knicks pick, and New York is struggling this year, so we could have been in the playoffs. And if the Knicks had been not in the playoffs or really bad record, we would still get their pick. So this year was kind of unique. So we didn't have to lose any games, and we didn't lose. We didn't try to lose any games. But the spirit, right now I've been here for 7 months. The spirit for us is to win games and kind of at any cost possible. And I understand it's being in that middle is not where you want to be, but you try to build a winning culture with your team. And again, even if you lose all the games, if you get a really good guy in the draft, who knows what's going to happen? Maybe the guy will not pan out. What are you going to do then, right? Is it going to be another losing season? Or are you going to try to, I guess the example would be the Cavs, who did get a lot of different high picks, still struggling a little bit. So, I'm sure it's a great organization. What they do makes sense, but you're going to have to look at some of the examples and not necessarily think that draft pick is going to save your entire season. And the fan base is the most important thing. If you just come and watch a losing team lose all the time, you can't. I feel like that'd be pretty terrible with your fan base. So that's my perspective. But we're not trying to tank at all. And, so we'll see what happens. Yes.
Are you using predictive analytics?
For certain models, yes. We're sort of getting there right now. There was a project when we were evaluating certain players before the season. As you know, we had certain different guys on our roster, so we're kind of doing analytics on what would happen if they left, what would happen if they didn't leave. So we definitely try to dabble in that as well. Yes.
What kinds of additional data are you looking forward to having over the next 5 years?
Additional data. I guess kind of, whatever those resources that I talked about, whatever they come up with, as well as what we can potentially expand a little bit in our department and actually watch games and collect our own data, perhaps that. But in terms of, it maybe develop a few other statistics that the Denver Nuggets think that are important. Maybe those. Right now, nothing concrete. But I guess in the summer we can think about some of the KPIs. I guess if I come to Tim Connolly's office and give him 5 things that he needs to know about a team, I would like to do that. We have a version of that right now, but we need to hone in to sort of what really is important to us. So those would probably be I know it's a pretty vague answer, but that's where we are right now, a pretty vague territory.
Would it be helpful if you had a player's conditioning level during a game, so you knew that when the player became higher at a certain level, if you could measure it scientifically, his performance drops dramatically and you can make the change?
Absolutely. Yeah, it has been proposed at MIT that players start wearing those kind of jerseys. The only thing is, you have to sort of understand that not every player would probably want to sign on. You know what I mean? You're exposing your weaknesses. I mean, everybody knows how good LeBron is, so LeBron doesn't need it. I mean, he may need it in terms of, okay, I need to understand what I need to sit out. It would definitely bring a lot of benefits, but there are some downsides. You know, veteran players, all of a sudden, you know, they're constantly tired or constantly, you know, exhausted, so all of a sudden they sit and not play. It would become, I have a feeling there would be some issues there, but nothing that can't be worked out, I'm sure. But I would expect the union would probably have a voice in this particular thing.
In your experience, is there a divide in NBA coaches of those who accept analytics and those who are very skeptical?
Yeah, very much so. Definitely some coaches are definitely a lot more open. You know, not going to use any names, but I mean, you know, I feel like in the media it's fairly easy to tell who left or who was let go because of certain, I guess maybe not necessarily inflexibility, but maybe, you know, different views towards analytics. But, you know, I have to commend Brian Shaw. He wasn't an analytics guy when he came, and he's not an analytics guy now, but he's extremely open-minded, and he's been taking the information, you know, and he's been trying to use it as much as possible, it seems like. And I work with the coaching staff, with the player development as well, kind of where the guys make shots, where they're not that successful. So they've been literally using the stuff that, you know, my team puts together. And it's refreshing to see that. It's really nice when that happens. And again, Brian's been wonderful in terms of accepting some of that stuff, even though it's completely new to him. Yes?
How about data outside of the field? Besides, I mean, before and after the games, is there any possibility you can collect data and correlate their performance in the game with their practice habits, with their sleeping habits?
Sure. No, great point. Sleeping especially is a really big one. You know, and I'm sure Dr. Inigo, when he talks about his stuff after me, he'll talk about sleeping a little more. When I was at MIT, they talked about sleeping a lot, and that's something that, you know, we definitely don't track that. But it would be great to track that because, you know, some guys, you know, would sleep on the plane, and they would think that that's enough to, you know, to feel good the next day. But it's clearly not enough. Or eating habits, as you mentioned as well, I think. Yes, I mean, it would probably be kind of verging on the big brother territory. We kind of don't want to do that because the players would feel kind of, you know, weird about it, honestly. So we try to keep it as, you know, as game related as possible. We do track them in practice. How many shots they take, you know, where they're successful, effort levels, even we do that as well. But some of the other stuff we would like to know, we probably wouldn't want to track. Yes?
What information are coaches most interested in having, and how do you want to present it?
Probably the pregame and the postgame reports, in my opinion, in my experience here. You know, they have certain coaches who have their own teams that they're going to be scouting, and they're going to be kind of, you know, talking to players about. But we kind of give like an analytical perspective as well. So they've been really receptive of that, and that's been working really well. Also, player development stuff. So, you know, if a guy is shooting, you know, as an example would be off the dribble, the guy is shooting 40%, catch and shoot is 57, right? Why is that? I mean, should we work off the dribble now, or should we focus on catch and shoot and make that player into a catch and shoot player? So that's a decision that they would have to make. But they've been extremely receptive to that as well. So shooting percentages, I mean, that's one thing that we've been working on a lot. And I've actually seen some guys really trying to look for specific, I guess, shot types or maybe even areas on the court. Maybe that's just me, maybe it's just wishful thinking. I don't know. But when I watch a player play, I'm like, oh, it's probably because I told him to do that. So hopefully that's the case. Yes.
Someone asked you a question about like new data. How about the tools for analyzing the data? It sounds like you use a lot of it in Excel, or are you using some other tools as well?
Excel is a big one. I mean, we also use those actual web resources where you can actually, it's just literally online. I mean, Real GM, you can just do everything kind of like right there. But I guess, you know, from my consulting background, I mean, I'm mostly comfortable with Excel. I haven't used Access yet, but can't wait to do that. It's a really nerdy thing to say, but you know, that's something that I used to do as well. But just because the data has not been, you know, 500 megabytes, so I haven't necessarily used Access yet. But Excel and PowerPoint has been kind of the bread and butter, honestly. Well, thank you very much, guys. Thank you for your insightful questions. Hopefully you guys have learned something, and those who know everything, hopefully it wasn't too boring. All right, thanks.
Thank you.